Now the first phase, energy spending phase. What happens in energy spending phase? 3 reaction actually occurs. So you can able to find 3 steps that occurs during energy spending phase. 3 reactions will occur to convert glucose molecule into fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. So the first phase, that is energy spending phase, you will be learning about 3 reactions which, as we discussed earlier, as a result of glycolysis, glucose is actually broken down into pyruvic acid or pyruvate. So this reaction is not a single step. It takes place in a series of reactions. The first reaction is conversion of glucose into fructose 1,6-bisphosphate, which involves 3 reactions which comes under energy spending phase. Now we'll move to the first one. The first step of the energy spending phase, we call it as phosphorylation of glucose. Phosphorylation of glucose. So what is phosphorylation of glucose? Glucose is phosphorylated to glucose 6-phosphate by consuming the energy with the help of ATP, and it produces glucose 6-phosphate. So the first step is conversion of this glucose, which is nothing but the 6-carbon compound is getting phosphorylated into glucose 6-phosphate. Addition of 1 phosphate group you can able to find here. So when the conversion happens from glucose to glucose 6-phosphate, you can able to find there is a consumption of energy. So what happens here? 1 molecule of ATP gets converted and it produces ADP. So the conversion of ATP into ADP occurs here in the first step. That is why we call the phase as energy spending phase. So ATP is consumed. Now the next step. So the first reaction, so we said 3 reaction, the first reaction is over. Now moving to the second reaction. Second reaction is nothing but formation of fructose 6-phosphate. This glucose 6-phosphate is converted into its isomer, that is fructose 6-phosphate. So glucose 6-phosphate is converted into fructose 6-phosphate to its isomerized form. Why the conversion of glucose 6-phosphate to fructose 6-phosphate occurs? Remember, this is cell. Glucose 6-phosphate is inside the cell cytoplasm. The glucose 6-phosphate is actually the polar molecule, and the cell membranes are not permeable to the cell membranes. They are actually impermeable to glucose 6-phosphate. Because of the impermeability, the glucose 6-phosphate gets accumulated inside the cell. To avoid this problem, glucose 6-phosphate is converted into its isomerized form known as fructose 6-phosphate. So this conversion happens to avoid the accumulation of glucose inside the cell cytoplasm. This reaction is catalyzed by an enzyme known as phosphohexoisomerases. Phosphohexoisomerase enzyme is involved in conversion of this glucose 6-phosphate into fructose 6-phosphate. The glucose, which is a 6-carbon component, produces glucose 6-phosphate by the addition of 1 phosphate group. So here this reaction is catalyzed by hexokinases. enzyme. So the enzyme hexokinase involves in conversion of glucose into glucose 6-phosphate. The second step, the glucose 6-phosphate is again converted into its isomerized form, fructose 6-phosphate, with the help of an enzyme phosphoxoisomerases. Now, the third step of the energy spending phase. So, formation of fructose 6-phosphate into fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. So, formation of fructose 1,6-bisphosphate from fructose 6-phosphate occurs. Remember, there is an addition of one phosphate group. So, again, one molecule of ATP is consumed to produce ADP for this one phosphate group, addition of one phosphate group to the fructose component. And here the reaction is catalyzed by the enzyme known as phosphofructokinase. I'm repeating again the energy spending phase. So it involves three reactions, that is the conversion of glucose into fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. That is what we have learnt in the series of reaction. Glucose is getting converted into fructose 1,6-bisphosphate by a series of three reactions. During this first reaction, a 6-carbon compound is actually converted into glucose 6-phosphate. Addition of one phosphate group occurs with the help of an ATP molecule. And this reaction is catalyzed by an enzyme known as hexokinase. The second step of this reaction is glucose 6-phosphate is converted into its isomerized form known as fructose 6-phosphate with the help of an enzyme known as phosphoxoisomerases. So these are isomers. So this reaction is reversible reaction. And why this conversion happens? It is because the glucose molecule is a polar molecule. This polar molecule cannot able to pass through the cell membrane. So the cell membranes are impermeable. Because of the impermeability, the glucose molecule stays inside the cell. To avoid this problem, glucose 6-phosphate gets converted into fructose 6-phosphate. The third step, fructose 6-phosphate is converted into fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. Here you can able to find an addition of one phosphate group, and due to that again there is a consumption of ATP and one phosphate group is added here. So this reaction is catalyzed by an enzyme known as phosphofructokinase. During this reaction you can able to find there is a consumption of ATP, that is nothing but the energy molecule at two phases. That is why this phase of the glycolysis is also known as energy spending phase. So two ATP molecules are utilized to convert glucose into fructose 1,6-bisphosphate.